was a performing musician working actually up and down the East Coast, and spent a number of years writing music and commercials at a place called Media Sound in New York City. Eventually, I had some medical matters that said you're not going to be performing on stage for the rest of your life, and went and got a doctorate. And I was particularly interested in studying how software is written. I was not as much interested in software as how is it people can get software written. And that then led to a very interesting career. I taught at Michigan State for 10 years, Carnegie Mellon for 2, and some other things, here and there is like, pick up teaching. And then my wife was recruited by Stanford, and we moved to Palo Alto, California. And while I was in California, I had the good fortune of being serially recruited. I worked at Apple for a number of years, then I went to Netscape for a number of years. Then I got recruited into Hewlett-Packard Labs, and I was there for a while. Then I just took time off, and I wound up at Carnegie Mellon, as I mentioned. And then I was at Google for quite a while. And while at Google, with a couple other people, I founded what was called Niantic Labs, and we put out a game called Ingress. And then it came to the point we spun out Niantic Labs from Google, and Niantic went off on its own. They created Pokemon Go and some of these other games that you've seen. And I just decided to not go with them. My wife had been asking me for years to retire. We certainly didn't need the money, but the thing is, I loved the work. And then by this time, we had been living in Maui for quite a while, and we wanted to come back to the States, and I wanted to move to a university town. She wanted to move to a university town. She grew up in one. And we looked around and we picked Davis, and we moved to Davis going on 5 years ago. So that's kind of the summary of my career path. I was at Apple from 1991 until 1995 when I went to Netscape. Apple is the best place I've ever worked. I loved working there. I loved the people. I loved the corporate environment. It was great. Apple now is mainstream, but at that time had no interest in being mainstream. They wanted to be the platform of choice for artists and musicians. And I got to work a lot on video editing tools, for example. And it was just fabulous. It was a time of it was kind of like the second phase of growth of the personal computer. And it was the beginning of a lot of, we could say, consumer networking, and the beginning of having really good, at that time, editing tools that individuals could do for music and for video. So I loved it. As someone who likes to think of myself as primarily a creative, and as a musician and as a composer, I got to work on wonderful things and do the thing I love, which is make music and make videos. So it was terrific. I didn't really want to leave, but also it was very clear that Netscape was going to be the opportunity of a lifetime. because that was the beginning of the commercial internet. And so I got recruited into Netscape from Apple. And I can't say I ever enjoyed working there as much, but we made everything up as we went along. And one of the things about working in Silicon Valley and high tech is you get to work with a lot of incredibly bright people and from all over the world. So I loved it. I loved Apple. And, I've been very happy with my career path, mainly because I've been able to work at the cutting edge of technology all my adult life. And I've been able to work with some of the most delightful people from all over the world. This is actually a harder question to answer than you might imagine. So give me a shot at this. When I went to college, it was before the time of having computer science programs. I have always been interested in software, and I've been interested in software from literally when I first went to college. These are in the days of big IBM mainframes. Something as like mini computers hadn't been thought of. Personal computers weren't even dreamed about. Um, Way back then, it was the notion there would only be 5 computers in the United States because that's all that would ever be needed. Think about that for a moment. So I got into this because I got into programming my freshman year. And one of the things about being a real geeky guy is I tend to wonder a lot about things. And I became fascinated by the fact that you could, at this time on punch cards, you could write a set of things that could then control a machine. Software gave the ability for people to make machines do their bidding. And then because I'm a mathematician, I became fascinated by a lot of the things about just how computing worked. And there's a lot of subtleties in computing, like thinking in different bases, thinking in terms of going to do networking, that you have to have, latching happen within circuits and things like that. There was so much in this around the technology that just I got very excited. How I got into it was in part being in the right place at the right time. On the other hand, having the foresight to make sure I was in the right place at the right time. Um, I think that for me, what was probably most important is I was exceptionally diligent in my studies. And coming from somewhat of a poverty background, realizing that if I was going to get out of the life I grew up in, the only way out I had was to be a really good student. So being a really good student led me to study hard and learn the basics very, very well. I'm not a person that crammed for exams. I'm that nerdy guy that actually did the readings before the class because I did not want to go back to the life that my family is from and what I had there. So the main thing that I would have to say is I knew what my interest was, and I made a point to keep abreast of it. I read everything I could that was at that time about large scale computing, about computing networks. I consumed so much science fiction that I'm sure there's sections of my brain that are just dedicated to certain science fiction authors and the ideas they left behind. One point that I will make, particularly about your college and your grades, if you really excel, and by that I mean that you really nail the grades, it opens up so many doors. It opens up the doors of scholarship. It opens up the doors of internship. It opens up the doors of being able to be on special projects because you're one of the ones that work that hard. The last thing I would say in terms of um, I don't know how to express this, but I'm not someone that really wanted to work at one particular company. I mean, I grew up with people that their whole dream was to work for IBM. And now, don't get me wrong, IBM is a wonderful company. It was the first share of stock I ever bought. You know, I love that company, but I've always been more interested in what I would do than where I would work, what the company was. So I've never had any kind of corporate loyalty because I don't believe that corporations are loyal to individuals. But what I have done is always gone to where they were doing things I wanted. And early on, I knocked on their door. And after that, I just got recruited. But again, if you're good at what you do and you perform at a very high level, and you don't make too many messes and you're not too hard to get along with, you just get recruited and recruited and recruited. That's one of the wonderful things about being in the STEM field is that there are always opportunities.
Uh, may I ask a question?
Of course.
So throughout your whole career, like Moore's law and everything, computing and everything you had to deal with was changing so fast. How much of an effort was it to keep up with like all the new increases in technology?
Charlie, right? You nailed it. That's the heart of the issue. How hard is it? It depends on your personality. If you're I would describe myself as a neophile. I'm someone that has a thirst for what is new. I'm also a person that, and this actually plays into this, I'm not a person of faith. I'm not someone that believes that the world is a particular way. It should be a particular way. I have the fundamental view that society and life is something we make up as we go along. So I have a thirst to really be at the edge of technology. So how hard is it? It's very hard. On the other hand, if you've really learned how to read well, you have a very broad vocabulary, you pay attention of what is in your field and the fields associated with it. It's not so much work as it is excitement. Oh, look at this new thing. Oh, look at this new chip that's been made. They've gone from what? They actually put a computer on a chip. I realize that that's, you know, to you, ancient history, but some of that's before some of your parents were born. Not much, though. Some of it is certainly after your grandparents were born. So now we have a computer on a chip. Now it does 4 bits. Now it does 8, 16, 32, 64. And that notion of where are we going, we don't know, but we know that all these things are changing. So it's very hard to keep up with it. Computing and technology in general is not a set it and forget it type of career path. It's no different from being in medicine or being in law. Engineering is the same way. Now, some engineering is changing much faster than other engineering. I venture to say that the changes that are going on, for example, in uh, areas like molecular biology or areas like software engineering or computer engineering are changing much faster than civil engineering. You know, civil engineering has been around a long time. It's a very strong, very important career path, but the changes aren't as rapid. We're not making that many new types of replacement for concrete. We know what rebar does. We understand how to build, you know, big abutments for bridges. We really don't know what we're going to be doing with AI, machine learning in particular. All this is new. How hard is it? Depends on your personality. If you like what's new, it's candy. If you don't like what's new and you are nervous about having to keep up, it's not the right field. Um, for most of my career, I've been a manager. So I'm going to give you, particularly Google. When I departed Google, I was a senior director of software engineering. Um, the life of a manager is different from the life of what would be termed an individual contributor. I'll try to give you a touch of them. As a manager, my day, my typical day, was typically filled with three things, all of them which are like waking up in the middle of the night, sleepwalking, tumbling down a long flight of stairs in a place you've never been before. And those were the good days. The main world of a manager is to enable people to do their best, or well, to do their best insofar as what the corporation needs to be done, which means what your product group needs or your research group needs. It means doing a lot of planning. And I want to go back to one of former President Eisenhower's remarks about plans are useless. Planning is indispensable. When you're in a rapidly changing area, plans don't mean much. But the process of planning allows you to continually consider options, alternatives, probabilities of things happening, probabilities of things not happening. Part of that is keeping abreast of technology. Part of that is, if you're living a life of a manager, you go to a lot of meetings. Some of that is you need to integrate with other parts of the organization. Some of that is you want to have private time with the people that report into you to make sure, A, they have what they need, B, that they're focused on what they need to be focused on, and C, always working to help people work together. Another aspect of what my daily day at Google would be like would actually be to read a lot of code and to be part of a lot of conversations in front of whiteboards and video screens. Because again, one of the things about being on the cutting edge of technology is you're making up what you do. And for years, I was the manager of Google Maps, not of Google Geo, which was the very large thing, but the part of Geo that was Maps, the front end of Maps, that what users saw. And you make this up. So an awful lot of what your time is, well, will this work? Will that work? We'll try this UI design. We'll try that UI design. What if we compress our data in the following way? Will that give us less network traffic? What about if we figure out which of the data centers we're going to store user information on? What do we do for redundancy? What do we do for reliability? What do we do in terms of disaster recovery? These are things that you're always thinking about. Now, turn the page. On the level of the individual contributor, Google is one of the companies that works very heavily by what are called OKRs, which is an acronym for objectives and key results. Usually a work group has a very clear objective of what they are trying to do this quarter. It's a publicly traded company, so life is broken into quarters. You have one quarter of your life is January through March. Then you have one that's April through June. You have one that's July through September, and you have one that's August through October through December. And for each one of those, you have a set of objectives. And this then breaks down into individuals having their own OKRs. Some of those are going to be what code I'm going to write. Some of these are going to be about what design documents I'm going to create or edit. Some of these will be about the amount of bug fixes I will do. Some of them will be along the lines of what tech talks will I give to share knowledge with my colleagues. So working by these OKRs, usually day by day, there's some kind of focus that's right on that set of objectives that you have for this quarter, along with yourself, your teammates, your work group, and the division you're in, and the product group you're in. So these wind up giving you a point of focus. It doesn't mean that everything is planned beforehand. It's not that I'm going to make sure I can write that following thing in 17 lines of code using 3 languages. No, I'm going to get that puppy to work. And it might be like, we want to introduce a new particular thing, like perhaps in Google Maps, we want to make it such that people could have, give you an example there, that they could keep their own personal maps. They want to have a baby shower, so they want to make a map of where the baby shower is going to be and the best routes to get there. They can then send that to their friends. And it might be baby shower map. That's the objective. And then after that quarter, you sit down and how well did I do it? How well did we do it? How well did the group do it? And so on like that. So it is a time of the day-to-day life is literally a day in the life as part of this focus, as part of this ongoing stream, realizing you're working with other people to accomplish something. And that's kind of what it was like. I loved it, actually. It was a great life.
I was about to add a question on to the conversation. So you were kind of talking about how, as a manager, you have to kind of, you're given like a goal and objective to complete.
Excuse me. There's a lot of background noise. I can barely hear you. Can you get closer to the microphone?
All right. Is it better now?
A bit. Go on.
Okay. So as a manager, you have to identify objectives and whatnot. But like say as a member of the team, do you have to figure out, okay, so I have this goal I need to complete. Do you set your own standards? Okay, I need this aspect, this thing. So you figure it out on your own and then show that, or how does it work?
I had a lot of difficulty understanding your question. What I heard was, when it comes time to having a goal, do I figure that out? Is that an accurate?
I think it's more along the lines of, so say you have like a project you have to work on. Do you set the requirements for the project, or does your superior set the requirements and then you help work with the team to make those requirements happen?
Okay, that's a good question. There are 2 aspects to this. One is, and I'm going to draw a distinction between a product manager and an engineering manager. Product manager is an incredibly important role that typically high schools and college don't train people into. They move into it once they're into a corporate environment. The way it's described is that a product manager will build the right product. The engineering manager will build the product right. This is an important distinction. So it is typically the product manager or the product manager hierarchy that will come up with what are the features to be built. What is the UI actually going to look like? Of all the things we could do in this product, what are the ones that we think are most important to either the most valuable users or the greatest number of users? That then becomes a prioritized list of what needs to be built. That is usually in the realm of the product manager, not superiors, usually their peers. Then on the engineering side, where I live, we would figure out how to do that. Does it make sense to do it in that order? What the product manager may want in terms of the market need may not be really conceivable from a technical standpoint. So we have to sit down and say, here are the trade-offs. We could do that and get it out in 75 million years, or we could do this other thing, which is half of what you want. We'll have it out in 6 weeks. So there then becomes a lot of back and forth between engineering and product management on how to determine what to do next. And then once that, from the engineering side, we realize what it is that needs to be done, We then work on how to figure out how to do it. And there are some engineering directors that will then sit in the room and like, I want everyone to do all these things. They tend not to last long in, at least in the internet. They don't last long in anything that's moving fast, because no individual is smart enough to figure out all that for all those people. So it then becomes typically a relationship between I should say conversation more than a relationship, between the engineering management and, excuse me, the technical leads. Like you might have one person who's primarily interested in the front end and they're involved with everything that shows up on the screen. You might have another person who's particularly interested in the back end and how everything is working on the servers. Maybe someone else is particularly interested in the security aspects. So then you all get together and you start coming up with designs and making trade-offs. And once that comes out, it actually eventually gets down to a level of what are the tasks we're going to do. In some areas, the management will assign people to do particular tasks. In other areas, which is the philosophy I follow, is you let the group pick the tasks they want to do. These are the tasks in order, and people can figure out what they're going to sign up for, just as long as everyone has two things to do: the main thing they're working on and the other thing they're doing when they're in a wait state. And when you're working on large scale code, it takes a while to compile. And so what do you do when it's compiling? You read, you prepare a talk, you fix bugs, or you go interact in a meeting with other people to figure out how to do the next set of things. So after all that, the short answer is what product to make comes from the product manager. How to make the product comes from the engineering manager. They tend to be peers that work like this.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
I had a question.
Please.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you were like an avid like composer, you're into music. So I was just wondering, how would you say that music connects to like what you do? Like, how would you say that music connects to like maybe like technology or math in your own view?
I was fascinated when I was a child. I began playing music very young, and I was fascinated particularly by how music, most Western music anyway, is so wrapped up in the powers of two. When you take a look, for example, at, again, I'm sticking on American and European music and derivatives therefrom, with an awful lot of African influence. But, you know, you take a look at our notational system. You have a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, an eighth note, a 16th note, a 32nd, and they go by having a number of flags on them. Well, okay, those are exponents. Actually, it's 1 over an exponent. But the relationship between base 2 and music and base 2 and computing, well, to me, they're almost the same. There's another aspect, though. To be good at music, you've got to spend a fair amount of time by yourself. You've got to spend a fair amount of time practicing things that are boring. At first, you've got to play your scales. You've got to play your arpeggios. You've got to really practice, depending on your instrument, intonation. Did you hit that pitch right? Did you hit 2 keys at once? You got your hand, did you screw up by hitting any other strings? Are you grabbing too tight? There's all these little things that go into the personality aspects of being good at music that I think are parallel to the personality aspects of being good in tech. You've got to spend time alone reading. You've actually got to work out the questions at the end of the chapter. You've got to try to understand the basics the best you can. And you've got to practice so your skills don't get rusty. I mean, like, for example, calculus is extremely important. trigonometry is extremely important. People who don't understand the basics of trigonometry are not going to do well when they get into calculus, particularly when you get into anything that that is periodic. You start being able to do things that are happening in a cycle and a rhythm, which means anything about time is going to suddenly have an awful lot of trigonometric expressions in it. So if the person worked hard to study trig and they understand it, and then they move into calculus and they get down the road where they start dealing with periodic functions and harmonic motion, the two go together. I view those as almost the same type of personality skills. It's being able to focus on something. It's a matter of personal discipline. It's striving to improve. It's striving to stay current. I mean, you stop playing music for a little while. It's not quite like riding a bike. You just can't get on and do it again. The small muscles really, really forget. You get it back really fast. If you play a wind instrument, the embouchure really forgets. So part of keeping current in a field is the same thing of like keeping proficient on your instruments. You've got to keep at it. And I view these two things as almost identical. There's one other point that I will make in that I believe that in software, particularly in software, aesthetics matter. Usually, it's an Occam's razor thing, but usually things that are simple are better than things that are complex. That's usually the case in music. If something is very simple and beautiful, I point to music, for example, like from Eric Satie, very, very simple music, gorgeous. I believe that there's a lot in software that's like that. If something is very convoluted and, oh, look at this, I was able to write a complete set of word processors in one line. Yeah, cool, a-hole. One of the things in software is you make it so it can be debugged. You make it so it can be taken apart. It's like listening to a symphony where all the parts are distinct. How does that happen? A good conductor. But I view that software is like that, making sure that all the parts are distinct. There is I was going to say premise, that's not quite the right word, but there's an established rule number one in software engineering, and it's called separation of concerns. That you don't have a function do two things. It does one thing. Do one thing really, really well. Make it easy to find, easy to debug. Music is a lot like that. You don't want to have all these instruments playing in the same sonic space. You want to make sure that the basses are in their area and the cellos aren't going down too deeply into it, but they're a little bit above it. And then the violas are a little bit above that, and then the violins are a bit above that, and then piccolos are up where the violins, top of the violins are, things like that. Trombones are kind of like there where the cellos are. So part of being able to organize orchestral music is know how each sounds and where their pitch is. Software is very similar. You make sure that you have your security things in such a way that you're not violating that security by having this module reach in or that module reach in. You keep things very distinct, separation of concerns. I think that that is another parallel between technology and music.
I actually have a question.
Please.
So how many years of experience do you have with the virtual and augmented reality? And was it an important part of your everyday job?
I'm in my 70s, so the answer is very little as a percentage basis. I was never really interested in virtual reality. It just didn't appeal to me. There's something about having like this that I physically find uncomfortable. Augmented reality is a very different thing. I think that at a massive scale, Ingress was probably the first real virtual reality game. and I managed engineering for Ingress. So I would say that we started that in 2011, and I left the organization when they spun out of Google in late 2015. So that was 6 years solidly dedicated to augmented reality. And I had worked on augmented reality actually a lot earlier. When I was at Apple, we were doing again with lenses, but they weren't like the HoloLens, or some of them would block you out. Nor is it really like Google Glass, but they were. Let's say you want to do a wiring harness for an aircraft. There's a lot of miles of wires in a big airplane. And these are done on big racks where people like lay out the wires. That's really hard to do. But if you're wearing a set of glasses and those glasses are showing you where that wire should go, it's really easy just to follow like that, and we'll show you where things are wrong right away. So that was about 92, and that was a project at the time, 1992. That was a project at the time that Apple Computer was doing with Carnegie Mellon University. Carnegie Mellon is a phenomenal school, and it's at the cutting edge of most things that have to do with computing and robotics, and has been for a very long time. So I'd say that my actual work with virtual reality is nil, and with augmented reality has probably spanned, well, by now that'd be 30 some years. With that one period of developing the game Ingress was probably the most concentrated, of how to make sure that we could represent a world, how we could put an artificial world on top of that, but make sure that when people are out in public, they would be safe. So that was the challenge of why we wanted it on the phone and not something that would be in a set of lenses that people might not see who is stalking them or coming up on them. The senior people in Niantic Labs used to spend, and I presume they still do, spend a lot of time thinking about user safety. And that is a challenge of dealing with any kind of augmented reality or virtual reality. Ready Player One isn't quite here yet. Now, if you haven't read that, you should. Next question. We are all products of our childhoods and our cultures. I come from a devoutly religious family that was very much against anything to do with science. So the hardest thing that I had to overcome in my career was actually breaking away from my family to go to college and to go into a scientific field. And there is no question that that is what gave me the greatest amount of difficulty, probably till I was in my mid to late 20s, because we don't recognize the point of view and the blinders we carry. What we grew up with, where we grew up, tends to be what we think is normal, and this is the way people are. Ain't the case. I grew up in a place that was, I would say, very bigoted. It was very biased. And that going into a world-class university where you're surrounded by people from all over the world, it's like, who are these people? And that was the biggest challenge, was actually coming to understand, not in the head, but in the heart, that all these people that look so different, they speak so differently, everything important to them is, what's that about? That was for me, that was the biggest challenge. Now, passing that, I would say that the biggest challenge after that I actually had was knowing when to walk away from something. For example, I loved Apple Computer. I loved working there. I like everything about the company. And I mean, you know, right now I'm looking at an Apple screen that's plugged into an Apple computer talking to you, you know, with my iPhone next to me. So I love all things Apple. Going to Netscape was very, very hard. How to, you know, this notion of give up what is comfortable and what is known and something I really like to go work on something I'm extremely interested in, knowing that in doing that, I leave friends behind. Colleagues after a while become friends. I leave the work behind that I love doing. You know, I'm working on video editing. I know what that's about. I do it a lot. I was very interested in it. And then going into this thing that's commercializing the internet. What's that about? So then after I was there for a while, Netscape was bought by America Online. So I worked there for a year until I could get rid of the golden handcuffs. And then I wanted to go back to Apple. And suddenly what happened is I got recruited by HP. Do I go there? Ooh, you know, it is a world-renowned laboratory. Well, it was before Carly Fiorina went there. And let me go try that. So I think that the other big thing, aside from shaking off the blinders of my birth family, was actually realizing that to be at the cutting edge of things, you have to keep moving. And that usually meant moving jobs. And then that was the hardest thing. I can't say I ever found anything in the work to be overwhelming. I was always good at math, so that helped a lot. And I was always interested in what was new. So I always read a lot. And I'm not a person that, I don't idle. I have no sense of procrastination whatsoever. I'm driven to do things and create things. So usually for me, the big things were always emotional ones. They were always about the personhood, the personality. When do I stay? When do I go? And that's always been the most difficult. When Niantic spun out of Google, 99% of me wanted to go with them because I love the group of people. The head of Niantic, a guy named John Henke, is one of the most incredible people I've ever gotten to work with. He's a wizard beyond what the word wizard means. And, you know, walking away from that. On the other hand, I'm living in Hawaii and, you know, I do love my wife and I love being with her. And it was either go back to working, you know, 10, 12-hour days, 7 days a week, or, oh, let's go snorkeling. Oh, I think we need to go paddleboarding a bit. Time to go up on Haleakala. And I actually made that hard personal choice to spend more time with my spouse, which immediately I realized, crap, why didn't I do this 10 years ago, 20 years ago? So that's the best answer I give you to that. It's never been the work. It's always been the relationship between the self and the organization. I have very little experience with machine learning, and robotics is I have a fair amount more there. Let me talk about machine learning. I've never really been in the fields where machine learning was was concentrated. I'm familiar with the math of it. I actually read it. I would recommend to everyone that there's a book came out a couple of years ago by Manning Ford, and the title of the book is Architects of Intelligence. And it's just a good interview with a lot of different people who are at the forefront of AI. I do believe that if I were coming up now and I was coming into the world now, I would probably totally focus on machine learning, and particularly its application to machine vision. I've worked a bit in machine vision, not much, more on the geometric aspects of, in a 3D world, trying to represent that given the sensors that are available, not much. My familiarity with robotics has been in several different areas. One, for a while, I was a mentor with 1678 here in Davis. I've had some experience, more than a little actually, with the application of robotics to agriculture. I'm fascinated by the integration of modern computing technology and machine learning and other technologies such as GPS and drone imaging, which you could think about that as robotics. I mean, to some ways of thinking a car is a robot, but so is an autonomous tractor running on GPS. And how far do you have to go to see that? I don't know. What, across from Covell, I mean, on Covell, across from Nugget? Look at almost any of the fields driving up 98 or 99, County Road 98 or 99 north of Davis. And you can look at the fields and you can see that they're GPS driven. Take a look at the way that a lot of fields here are being planed. A lot of that is drone imagery. So my familiarity with robotics is based on those. It's not an area that I actually made my career in. I have some understanding of mechanical engineering, but nowhere near as much as I have in the areas of electrical engineering and software engineering.
What was like the new technology which came out during your career, which you were most excited about, or you thought would be the most useful?
TCP/IP, right there. TCP/IP. The careers I'm most excited about are ones that are not in the fields that I am in. I'm incredibly interested in molecular engineering. I'm incredibly fascinated by biomechanical engineering. I think that everything that's going on with DNA is just unbelievable. Remember, biology is a STEM field, but in my field, I think that it's probably going to be two things. It's going to be TCP/IP, which gave us the types of distributed networks we now have. And most of the technology we have that's really changing our lives isn't because of what that thing is. It's because of how networking allows things to all work together. Whether you're talking about a drone light show that are being used instead of fireworks, or you're talking about something frightening like the Paladin howitzers, that can, in a group, drop shells wherever you want. All these things are networked. The other thing that I would say would just be the relentless advance of computing power on a wafer, which has given us the incredible range of evolution. A number of years ago, Byte magazine ran a story, and they had one of their editors or writers, John Dvorak, in it, and he's got a video camera and a cassette player and a compass and a GPS thing and a big cell phone, and that was in one frame, and one of these was in the other frame. Yeah, that's the picture from where I used to live. So that constant evolution of miniaturization, which comes along with lower power consumption and faster speeds, that giving us incredible computing power, which then enables making sense out of what we can get out of the sensors, whether it's for machine vision, it's for doing chemical detection in the air, whether it's anything like that, and hooking it all up with networks. So TCP/IP, that's where I'll start. I have a couple. I, I, I had the wonderful blessing of having worked with high school students for a number of years. And I'm going to now take my moment and tell you things you don't want to hear. Number one, math is more important than you think it is. Get really good at math, all of it. You especially want early on to learn statistics, which you can't really understand without calculus. But number one, get good at math, because almost everything in a technical field, one way or another, comes back to that. Number two, learn how to write clearly. You'll find that an awful lot of your career success will be determined not by what you say, but what you write. So learn how to write clearly, learn how to write concisely, learn how to write without snark. Learn to understand basic things about when you use a pronoun and when you don't, when you repeat a noun and when you don't, when you don't use too many prepositions, when you make sure that you've laid out a coherent thing. You have a topic sentence, and then you go on with that. Learn math, learn to write. And the third thing I would say is try to expose yourself to as many different sciences as you can, because the science underlays engineering. And then once you get exposure to those sciences, try to at least get a layman's understanding of different engineerings. Like if you're going to be looking at electrical engineering, okay, really what is the difference on a device that works on AC versus DC? Or which part works one way, which part works the other way, and why? Similarly, then you want to look at the engineering. What are the basic things that a mechanical engineer knows? What are the 7 basic machines? In chemical engineering, what's the basic notion of how reactions are not just one way, they're always bidirectional, sometime more than the other. What's a heat of activation? What's an activation energy? If you look at electrical engineering, what's Kirchhoff's law? Why is it important? What does that tell you about understanding a circuit? Why are capacitors so different from resistors, and why do you need them? What's the difference between a capacitor and a battery? Sometimes they do the same thing, sometimes they don't. Why not? So getting a lot of exposure, being really good at math and getting exposure to the sciences and exposure to the different engineerings will help you understand where you are, where you're at. And then my suggestion would be see what you daydream about. Keep a journal. I always have with me this little book. And as I get ideas or I find I'm daydreaming about something, I write it down. I've been doing this since I was in high school. So that way you can find out, are you spending more of your time thinking about how to build machines or how to write the software for the machines? Are you spending more time to figure out how to build a bridge or actually how to come up with a chemical compound that would make concrete stronger? So you can be in one field while you're in a different field. So you kind of need to have a sense of what you like to do and what you like to know about, and then find where they go together. Myself, I like being in anything that has to do with human communication, which software is fundamental. Building software is fundamental. So that's my best comment to you. Math, study, write, and have a broad understanding so you can then have your discipline and expand into your discipline.